On May 19th and 20, Putin visited Beijing and Russia and China signed about 40 agreements. Now, this is not about the quantity, this is about the substance. One of the treaties signed was the Multipolar World Declaration, and this is extremely big because this took a direct hit at the American hegemony. 20 agreements were signed on media corporation, trade, nuclear agreement, etc., and another 20 plus agreements were signed on their oil and gas integration and energy pipeline. Now Russia, US is just calling this a simple photo op or something that's just symbolic because no military alliance was formed. But this is extremely big because number one, Xi Jinping and Putin's visits are getting more usual. It's not as dramatic, and they're in continuous dialogue with each other. So this is very big. This is like they're coming together against the US. For another example is that together they are building an alternative to SWIFT, basically, which is a yuan and ruble transactions are expanding, and this dollar bypass architecture is scaling up. So this is not experimental anymore, it's systemic. And as China is becoming Russia's main energy buyer 2022, and then Russia was forced to pivot east. Now this relationship is not all flowers, it's not the greatest thing. For one example is that they tried to collaborate together on building the CR-929 joint aircraft project, but Russia did not trust China enough to share its aircraft engine technology. And then China was waiting for more. So China decided to continue with its COMAC C929 project on its own. They wanted to build Boeing and aircraft alternatives. Now, thing is, even if this relationship, there is distrust in it. This relationship is built on necessity for Russia, and which is what makes it so strong. Because after, as I was saying, Europe sanctioned Russia after 2022, and the West basically sanctioned Russia. Russia was forced to pivot east. What this means is that China basically absorbed this and was buying Russian energy at discounted prices. The West is saying that China is exploiting Russia, and Russia has no choice other than go to Russia resents China for this. But the thing is, since this is built on necessity, it's a very unbreakable alliance in the sense that they require each other. Now, what else is happening? How are other third world countries reacting to this? They are not choosing sides, US versus Russia and China. They are doing whatever is best for them. So, like Kenya is welcoming both. Vietnam is buying energy from both, and also Europe and Russia energy had collapsed after the Minsk agreement. So again, it has to, pivot. Russia has to pivot, and even Brazil is China is like the biggest country China has invested in is Brazil. Like outside it, and Brazil is also making energy agreements with the US. So everyone's doing what's best for themselves. Now, where does India come in all of this? So India's 2022 to 2025 foreign policy was initially extremely successful. Russia invaded Ukraine. India refused to align with either of them. It bought Russian discounted oil. It protected its energy imports, and it was going very well because everybody wanted access to India, and India didn't commit fully or take any sides. So simultaneously, it also deepened its ties with the Quad, and improved its US and Israel relations. But now the problems have started coming because the balance of payments, there is that problem. Then there is the foreign investment that is coming to India is like reducing. Then capital outflows are going to the US. And why was this happening initially towards India? And why is this changing? Because initially India was a good place to invest because it was an option that it, as I said, it wasn't committing to anybody. Now the issue is now, and US was also saying you put $5 in $5 into the US, the return wasn't as much because India was giving a higher return. But now that US is giving better returns, we are noticing that there is nothing specific about India that is attracting all this money, and that's why it's reducing. So these issues include limited trade integration, regulatory uncertainty, dependence on the global liquidity cycles, and rupee is weakening a lot at this point. And if you look at this, initially with this given war, India-Iran ties have weakened under the Modi era as Modi has like shifted more towards the US-Israel axis, and the Chabahar energy balancing payment has declined because after the sanctions, especially, after the US sanctions, it has declined, and Iran is also not giving oil to India at this point. So why did this happen? Because after Khamenei was killed, India's response was basically shown as hesitant. The diplomatic signaling, because it didn't want to get into the bad books of the US, and since this was seen as hesitant, the oil is also not coming. The quad is weakening because US's attention is now shifting to different other places. The Western Hemisphere, trade wars, Middle East, and India is no longer uniquely indispensable. It is competing with. It is not like it is clearly not the China alternative that it was setting out to be in the past 3 years. It is competing with Vietnam, Indonesia, Mexico, and because they are giving the same manufacturing and supply chain opportunity. And now India is trying to develop those pull factors like specific to India, like it's coming up with foreign trade agreements with UK, Europe, New Zealand, and the trade diplomacy, even though there is very good geopolitical positioning because Modi idhar rata hai udhar rata hai, it shows like I'm good friends with all these countries. The trade diplomacy, the actual impact of it is not looking very good, and it will have to do that. Right now, Russia is valuing India because it buys its discounted oil, and it's not playing isolation politics. It's not going against Russia, and it provides a non-China channel because at this point Russia is getting very dependent on China in a lot of ways, as I told about like the agreements that were being signed. So thing is, after these alternative financial systems succeed and Russia no longer needs these Western backdoors, India's leverage will decline sharply because the BRICS are increasingly tilting to China, becoming China Russia centric, and India is not. I'll give an example. And especially China, like China, India obviously have lots of mistrust, especially with the number of troops. There are 50 to 70,000 troops at any given time on the border of India and China. And the thing is, one other example is China only sent an ambassador to the India BRICS New Delhi meet where all the foreign ministers were coming, and this is a massive slide to India because you can't send an ambassador to a foreign minister meet. That like is just positioning and rankings matter a lot. So India at this point is risking becoming a temporary oil buyer and not a long-term strategic pillar. And China may be looking into this century-defining partnership with Russia. So now everyone in Indian foreign policy loves the word multipolarity. There are multiple power centers, civilizational autonomy, and every civilization is valid. And Xi and Putin literally put this into writing in Beijing this week. And as an idea, it sounds great because there is no Western leverage, no dependence on loans and aids. But here's what nobody says out loud: middle powers get squeezed, and right now we don't know India's position. It for initially non-alignment was a game. Like when US was the unipolar power, everybody knew the place, and you didn't have to align with US versus Russia because like they were just there and you could do whatever you wanted. India, we invented non-alignment and it was good for us. But now that there are two consolidated blocks and you're sitting in the middle, having no proper position, then you don't have leverage. You have exposure. So initially it was like India's leverage was that you needed India, okay, for this because there was a unipolar power. But now that that's like who needs India and for what, and that's the question. That's like after Moscow, that is the question. So yeah, that's the line.